They called him family, but only when they needed something from him. Every December, as the Sullivan estate lit up like a cathedral of wealth, Liam Sullivan disappeared behind the swinging doors of the kitchen. He was 32, openly gay, and born into a world that dripped with privilege, yet never let him taste it. While others at the table passed wine and laughter, he passed trays. When Sarah, the golden child, breezed into rooms draped in designer fabrics, Liam carried stacks of plates that left red marks on his wrists. No one thanked him. They barely looked at him. He had learned long ago that invisibility was the only way to survive inside his own home. This Christmas Eve, the house felt even heavier, as if it too knew what was coming. Frost pressed white fingers against the windows while inside, chandeliers glared down at Liam like judges. Margaret Sullivan, his mother, had handed him a folded list that morning, her voice clipped with authority. 25 guests, all influential, no mistakes, no asking Sarah for help because Sarah had to shine. Liam said nothing, only nodded. He had been trained to serve before he learned to speak. He moved through the cavernous kitchen like a shadow. Every sound of boiling stock, every clean slice of his knife, dulled the ache building inside him. It was not just the labor, it was the certainty that, once again, he would be erased from the celebration he had built with his own hands. He pictured Sarah's laughter ringing across crystal glasses while he stood behind a doorway, listening to music that never invited him to dance. But there was a crack in the pattern this year, a spark he kept tucked behind his calm expression. Among the guests expected that night was Victoria Chen, a Fortune 500 CEO known for reshaping empires as easily as others rearranged flowers. They knew her as a power player. Liam knew her as something else entirely, his upcoming client. Months of quiet work had led to this night. Though no one in this house had noticed the late meetings or the design drafts glowing from his laptop long after midnight. They didn't see stellar events taking shape under his fingertips. They didn't know he wasn't just cooking. He was building something. The contrast between who he was to them and who he had become to the world sharpened with every garnish he placed. He thought of how Sarah would glide through the party, adored like an ornament, while he stayed behind the curtain. But he also thought of the contract on Victoria's desk, the one waiting for her signature. He imagined her eyes meeting his across the room, not as a servant, but as an equal. The idea flickered through him like a secret flame. Liam checked the final roast, steadying his breath as the clock neared dusk. Outside the dining room, laughter rose, his family assembling to play their roles. He stayed in the kitchen, smoothing invisible creases from his apron, preparing to play his. Yet deep down, something shifted. He was no longer here to belong. He was here to reveal what they had refused to see. Sometimes the world buries its brightest roots in the coldest soil. Tonight, beneath chandeliers and cold stares, one of those roots was ready to break through. If you believe respect should never be optional, subscribe to Heart Story and stay until the end, because this is not just a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming the space where you were once invisible. By the time the first cars crunched up the long gravel drive, the Sullivan house gleamed like a cathedral of excess. Golden lights draped the columns, frost curled along the stone steps, and the air outside trembled with distant laughter. Inside, the room swelled with warmth and perfume as coats were peeled away and voices echoed off the marble. Liam moved among it all, silent, unseen, balancing silver trays like pieces of armor. Sarah descended the grand staircase as if the party existed solely to frame her entrance. Silk rustled against the banister while diamonds winked at her throat. A photographer from one of Margaret's charity boards caught her smile in a burst of flash, and she glided through the crowd, collecting compliments like confetti. Liam caught a glimpse of her from the corner of the kitchen doorway, the way she tilted her chin, the way people turned toward her as though she radiated light. He turned back to his platters of hors d'oeuvres without a word. He wore a plain white shirt beneath a dark apron, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the scent of rosemary and roasted lamb clinging to his skin. He passed through the glittering dining room again and again, topping off glasses, refreshing canapes, vanishing before anyone could meet his eyes. The rhythm of service was the only shield he had. Margaret waited until the table was full and the chatter had risen to a lively hum before striking. She lifted her glass and gestured casually toward him. In him, he refilled a basket of bread. "He doesn't do much, really," she said, the words laced with sugar and steel. "We're just grateful he can help in the kitchen. The youngest is our real pride." The words hit like ice water poured over candlelight. Conversations faltered. A violinist near the foyer stumbled on a note. Then Sarah's laugh sliced through the silence. Practiced and perfect. "He's basically our live-in help," she added, tossing her hair. Her voice dipped in mock affection. Liam didn't flinch. He slid the bread basket onto the table with quiet precision, then retreated behind the drape of the kitchen door. But he felt the sting like a bruise spreading through his chest. He had expected it, almost counted on it, yet the casual cruelty still pierced. He wondered if they noticed how their words carved at him, or if he had become so much a fixture that hurting him no longer registered. Across the table, Victoria Chen said nothing. She leaned back slightly, eyes calm but sharp, as though she were reading not just the room but the truth hidden under its gloss. While others laughed too loudly to cover their discomfort, she studied the man in the apron disappearing into the shadows with an expression that was neither pity nor dismissal. It was something closer to curiosity. Liam stood in the kitchen's glow, the laughter from the dining room floating back like distant music from a locked ballroom. He pressed his palms to the cool edge of the counter, willing the heat in his face to fade. He had endured years of being reduced to a role, a shadow, a cautionary tale whispered between courses. Tonight was no different on the surface, but he carried the quiet knowledge that the ground beneath this house was already shifting. Sometimes cruelty does not roar. Sometimes it smiles across fine china and sips wine as it erases you. And sometimes the most radical act is to keep standing tall, not to prove them wrong, but to remember you are already more than what they see. The dining room shimmered with the kind of curated beauty that seemed designed to impress photographs more than people. Candles flickered in measured intervals along the center of the table, casting soft halos over polished crystal and towering arrangements of winter roses. The air hummed with the steady drone of conversation, punctuated by the occasional clink of silver against china. Liam moved quietly between the chairs, adjusting place settings, refilling glasses, and clearing plates as if choreographed by habit. No one spoke to him. No one ever did. When the main course was carried in, the room hushed with a collective murmur of anticipation. The roast glistened beneath a golden crust, vegetables arranged like artwork, sauces glinting under candlelight. Even Sarah, who usually saved her admiration for herself, paused to admire the display before composing her face again into effortless boredom. Liam stood just inside the archway, waiting to step forward if anything faltered. His posture was calm, but beneath the surface, a current of defiance curled through him like heat. It was then that Victoria Chen placed her fork down with deliberate grace and lifted her gaze. Her presence had been quiet all evening, yet it seemed to sharpen now, drawing the attention of everyone around her. "Who curated the menu and coordinated this evening's service?" she asked, her tone smooth but carrying the weight of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. The question hovered, unexpected, slicing through the fabric of easy chatter. Margaret's smile tightened in an instant. She reached for her glass as though buying time, then spoke lightly. Sarah oversaw the planning. Her voice trembled on the edges of confidence, but most guests were too startled to notice. Liam felt the air press in around him like a tide. He could have stayed silent, allowed the lie to settle, but something inside refused to bend this time. He stepped forward from the archway, steady and unhurried, his hands resting loosely at his sides. "I did," he said, not loud, but with the clarity of someone who had spent years rehearsing silence and was finally done with it. The room stilled. Cutlery paused midair. Even the candles seemed to flicker lower as eyes shifted toward him. For the first time all evening, Liam stood not as part of the background, but as part of the scene. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then rose to her feet with a composure that made the air tighten. "How fitting," she said slowly, her words landing like stones on water. Because Stellar Events, the company you built, is the very firm my board is preparing to sign one of our largest contracts with. The declaration cracked through the room like sudden thunder. Margaret's fingers slipped, and her wine glass hit the table with a dull thud, scarlet spilling across the linen like a wound. Sarah's face drained of color, her lips parting but no words forming. The guests exchanged startled glances, their expressions caught between disbelief and fascination. Liam stood still, the murmur around him fading to nothing. The years of invisibility did not vanish in that moment, but they loosened their grip. For the first time in this house, his name was not a caution or an afterthought, it was a revelation. Recognition, when it finally comes, does not roar. It arrives quiet and certain, like dawn spilling through heavy curtains. And it reminds the world that truth does not need permission to be seen, it only needs the courage to step forward and claim its place. The echo of Victoria Chen's words still trembled in the air. Yet she did not sit back down. Instead, she straightened, her shoulders cutting a poised silhouette against the glow of the chandeliers, and looked directly at the stunned faces circling the table. "This is not your household help," she said, her voice measured but resonant enough to carry through every corner of the room. "This is a CEO I trust with our most high-stakes projects. To us, he is not a helper. He is the boss." It was not loud, not theatrical, yet the effect was seismic. A yiff of murmurs rolled through the guests, glasses clinking as hands trembled slightly. A few of them, business leaders themselves, began to nod, the way people do when they recognize power even if they had been blind to it moments before. One man at the far end of the table started to clap, hesitant at first, then firmer, until several others followed. The sound fragmented but undeniable. Liam remained still by the archway, the quiet at his center deeper than the noise around him. For so long he had imagined a moment like this would feel like fire, like triumph, like the air cracking open. Instead, it felt like a door finally clicking shut behind him, sealing a room he no longer needed to enter. He glanced at Margaret, whose face had settled into a rigid mask, her pride shattering so cleanly it almost glittered. Sarah sat frozen, her practiced poise dissolved, eyes wide as if the table beneath her might give way. They had built a story of him for years, woven from neglect and contempt, a tale they repeated until they believed it, how he was the fragile one, the disappointment, the shadow trailing behind their shine. Tonight that story collapsed, not with argument or anger, but under the simple weight of truth revealed in full light. Victoria resumed her seat, smoothing her napkin with surgical precision, as though her declaration had been nothing more than a passing observation. The conversations resumed, fractured at first, then cautiously rebuilding around this new axis where Liam existed not as an afterthought, but as a presence. He slipped back into the rhythm of service long enough to clear the last of the plates, though now every movement drew glances. Eyes followed him that had never bothered to see him before. For the remainder of the evening, the Sullivan house no longer felt like theirs alone. It felt as if something unseen had shifted ownership, as if the invisible lines of hierarchy had been quietly redrawn while they were still holding their forks. Liam carried the weight of that shift with calm steadiness. He did not need to gloat or speak. Their silence was more eloquent than anything he could say. Respect, he understood then, was not something granted like a gift. It was something claimed through quiet endurance, through doing the work they thought too small and building something too vast for them to contain. And when it finally arrived, it did not need noise to announce itself. It simply stood, undeniable, even in silence. Months later, winter had melted from the city like old paint, and with it went the lingering echoes of that night in the Sullivan dining room. The house still stood, but the weight it once cast over Liam had thinned to nothing. He no longer crossed its threshold carrying trays or silences. He entered different doors now, tall glass ones etched with his company's name. Doors that opened not because someone allowed him in, But because they were built for him, it was early afternoon when the email arrived from the board of the Brookshire Country Club, the gilded sanctuary where the Sullivans had spent decades flaunting their pedigree. They wanted Stellar Events to design their upcoming gala and affair so opulent, it would draw the same elite who once watched Margaret and Sarah parade through charity luncheons. The choice was unanimous. There was no negotiation, only a signature line beneath Liam Sullivan's name. When the day of the contract signing came, the country club's conference suite glimmered with lacquered wood and spotless glass. A long table gleamed under pendant lights, flanked by sleek leather chairs that seemed made to cradle power. Liam occupied the central seat at the head, posture composed, suit crisp, the faint glint of the rainbow pin on his lapel catching the light when he moved. Across from him sat Margaret and Sarah, summoned as representatives of the club's social committee. Though their faces betrayed the truth, they were here as spectators to their own undoing. Margaret's hands, once so steady when directing staff at home, trembled slightly as she adjusted the papers in front of her. Sarah stared at the contract with a fixed smile that never reached her eyes. The same room that had once echoed with their laughter at his expense now seemed to press inward on them like a judgment. Liam's voice was calm as he explained the policies, the timelines, the standards his team required. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone was not loud, only unshakable. When the final page was placed before them, he paused, letting the silence stretch like a drawn curtain. Then he spoke, evenly, the words landing with the clarity of stone placed on marble. "Years ago, I was the servant in your house," he said. "Today, I write the rules." Neither of them replied. The only sound was the faint scratch of their pens as they signed under his company's emblem, the ink binding them to the very order they had once thought beneath them. As they left, Liam remained seated, watching the space where they had stood dissolve back into stillness. He felt no thrill, no blaze of revenge, only the quiet satisfaction of distance. What had once been a battlefield was now just a room where business was conducted. The past no longer had claws, only echoes. Success, he realized, had never been about proving them wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could stop living for their permission, that he could build walls not to keep people out, but to keep his worth from being bartered away. Would you have signed those papers if you were in their place? Comment. Respect if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, and subscribe to Heart Stories to witness more stories where the underestimated rise and the forgotten rewrite their names in gold.